All right, looks like the live is on. Appreciate you being here today. What is it? Today is what, Thursday? Is that right? Thursday the 12th? Good Lord, it's February 12th. And hey, before we get into today's topic, I want to briefly reset the context. In case this is the first session you're watching, the term Afterthought IRA is one we coined internally. You won't find it in a textbook or on Google. It's simply a label for a framework we use when a client has a large pre-tax IRA balance, often, $2 million and up, that is not required for retirement income. When that condition exists, the IRA may stop behaving like a retirement asset and start behaving like an enormous legacy liability. In certain estate contexts, those dollars may be exposed to estate taxes and eventually income tax in the hands of the beneficiaries. Even when estate tax is not present, the income tax compression alone can materially impair what the next generation ultimately receives. The Afterthought IRA framework is designed to evaluate whether part of that asset can be repositioned structurally, or in many cases, all of it, not optimized incrementally in a way that may reduce tax drag and potentially convert impaired dollars into tax-exempt capital for heirs. Conceptually, it may involve the coordinated use of a qualified structure like a defined benefit plan and a grantor trust with careful sequencing and professional oversight. It is case specific, it is fact dependent, and it absolutely requires proper legal and tax review. But at a high level, that's the framework. Now, today's conversation is not about how to execute that structure. Today, we're examining why some Afterthought IRA designs lose credibility, even when the strategy itself is sound. Excuse me. Let me start today with something that might sound counterintuitive, especially if you've been around advanced planning for a while. Most advanced strategies do not fail because the idea is wrong. They fail because the design doesn't hold up under scrutiny. In fact, some of the most problematic outcomes I've seen came from strategies that were conceptually sound, mathematically defensible, and technically permissible, yet still lost the confidence of the very professionals who are supposed to support them. That's what today's live is all about. Not whether the Afterthought IRA framework works in theory, not whether it's allowed under certain circumstances, but why some designs quietly collapse even when everyone initially agrees on the strategy. This matters because trust doesn't break all at once, it erodes. And once trust erodes, execution doesn't matter anymore. So for anyone who just joined, I'm discussing the Afterthought IRA framework, which is a way of evaluating large pre-tax IRAs that are no longer needed for income and may be exposed to layered taxation in the estate context. It's not about execution today, but design integrity, and why some structures hold up under scrutiny and others don't. Now, in my last two sessions, we talked about why large IRAs may behave very differently once income needs are gone and income's not needed from it. And then how the Afterthought IRA framework repositions part of that problem structurally. So today, we're talking about the moment after agreement when the strategy moves from concept to design, because that's where things often go sideways. Let me say something clearly at the outset. There is no single correct Afterthought IRA design. Anyone who tells you there is, that should just make you feel uncomfortable. What does exist are design choices that either one, reinforce confidence and clarity, or two, introduce confusion, volatility, and skepticism. And attorneys in particular are extremely sensitive to that difference. not because they dislike insurance, not because they dislike creativity, but because they live in a world where defensibility matters more than cleverness. Now, the most common mistake I see happen, it happens very clearly. It's when the conversation shifts too quickly from architecture to illustration. But before the professional team has fully aligned on what problem is being solved, what success actually looks like, and what risks are being intentionally accepted. And suddenly, numbers appear, projections, charts, assumptions, spreadsheets. And the moment that happens, the conversation changes. Because now instead of asking, does this structure make sense? People start asking, why does this number move like that? That's not a small shift. That can be a fatal one. Advanced strategies should earn the right to be illustrated. They should not rely on the illustration to justify their existence. When they do, trust becomes conditional. Another design failure point shows up when optimization outruns explanation. It's tempting, especially for technically capable teams, to push for the most aggressive outcome. The highest death benefit, more leverage, more efficiency, more upside. But every layer of optimization comes with a cost. Sometimes it's volatility. Sometimes it's complexity. Sometimes it's a story that becomes harder to explain cleanly. And in afterthought IRA cases where the strategy already crosses silos, story coherence matters more than marginal gain. If the design cannot be explained calmly, clearly, and consistently to an attorney, CPA, and eventually a client, then it doesn't matter how elegant it looks. The design is already broken. And this is where I want to slow down because this is subtle. Many designs technically work, but they feel unstable. They introduce questions like, why does the death benefit dip before it grows? Why does the valuation jump at a specific year? Why does this feel more complicated than it needs to be? Those questions don't mean the design is wrong, but they do mean the design may not be appropriate for the professionals involved. And ignoring that distinction is how good strategies lose allies. So let's talk about what tends to hold up rather than what breaks. Again, not mechanics, not steps, not numbers, but principles. The first principle is what I call intentional simplicity. An afterthought IRA or in afterthought IRA cases, simplicity is not in the absence of sophistication. It's the result of discipline. When we've reviewed different approaches to the same framework, what consistently stands out is this: designs that prioritize stability over optimization, conservative assumptions over best case scenarios, and clarity over cleverness. Those tend to be the ones that professionals rally around, not because they're timid, but because they're durable. And just to briefly reorient anyone who's joining me mid-conversation, this series is exploring how certain large pre-tax IRAs may be repositioned structurally. And today we're examining why design discipline matters more than optimization. Now, the second principle is predictability of behavior. Attorneys don't need to understand every internal mechanic of a policy, but they do need to trust how the asset behaves over time. If a death benefit increases during funding and then remains level, well, that's intuitive. If assumptions are run conservatively, that's defensible. If valuation mechanics are controlled early and stabilized later, that feels intentional. Predictability doesn't mean rigidity. It means the design behaves the way the story says it will. When that alignment exists, confidence grows. When it doesn't, even a technically sound design feels fragile. The third principle is respect for sequencing. Afterthought IRA is not a single transaction. It's a sequence of coordinated decisions over time. Designs tend to break when too much is introduced too early, or when future steps are implied but not clearly framed. Professionals who want to know what happens now, what happens later, and what decisions are deferred, they don't need every single answer up front, but they do need to know the unanswered questions are intentional, not overlooked. The final principle, and this one is often missed, is role clarity. Afterthought IRA designs fall apart when advisors overstep into legal explanations, when attorneys are expected to bless mechanics they haven't reviewed, or clients are exposed to details before the professional team is aligned. Strong decisions respect boundaries. They invite collaboration without forcing consensus prematurely. They allow professionals to stay in their lane while still understanding the architecture of the whole. And when that happens, the strategy doesn't feel like an insurance idea. It feels like a planning solution. That distinction is everything. Now, I want to bring this back to why we're spending an entire live on design and not execution. Because once a design loses trust, it almost never gets it back. Not because it was illegal, not because it failed, not because it felt unstable. And in high net worth planning, perception is not cosmetic, it's foundational. So if you take one thing away from today, let it be this. Advanced strategies don't need to be impressive. They need to be defensible. They need to make sense to the quietest person in the room, not just the most enthusiastic. And when a design respects that reality, the strategy has a chance to actually do what it was meant to do. Next week, we'll continue this conversation by looking at how professionals should evaluate whether an Afterthought IRA conversation even belongs on the table before modeling, before design, before anyone gets excited. For now, if today helped you understand why some good ideas lose momentum, then this live did exactly what it was meant to do. Thanks for joining me today.